One of the most important things it does is it activates a cell renewal process called autophagy, and that just means self-eating in Greek, but I like to think of it as Marie Kondo for your cells, sparking joy everywhere. We often go to the doctor. The doctor will say, yeah, that's just a sign of aging, get used to it. Oh, you don't like your gray hair. I've got some too. Well, I have news for you. I don't want to be like you. The insulin response is really not good anymore. And as a result, you're constantly hungry. You need to grab the donut, the ho-ho, the Pop-Tart, the Cheetos.
First symptom of perimenopause is not hot flashes and night sweats, although it can be for some people. It's mood changes, affect, brain fog. Where did I leave my keys? Where did I leave my phone? Why did I walk into this room again? I have the word in my head, but I can't actually get it to my mouth. There's a little bit of that.
She was quiet, and then she shook her head and said, I wouldn't do the IVF if I were you. You've only got a good 5 years left. Really.
You only have a good 5 years left of what? Your life?
Of my life.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Better with Dr. Stephanie. 'Tis me, your host, Dr. Stephanie Estima. If you have ever looked at your gray hair, or maybe the fine lines and wrinkles that are starting to creep up, and have thought, damn, things are changing. And I don't want to be vain about this, but I also really don't like this. This is the episode for you. We are talking today with Leslie Kenny, and we are talking about the hallmarks of aging. There are 12 of them. And most importantly, what we can do to improve and reverse, including your gray hairs and your fine lines and wrinkles, how we can reduce some of those signs of aging. And it's okay to be vain. Like I have said before, I am a vain woman. And whenever I say that, I don't know, I always feel like I sound like I'm from the South, but I am a vain woman, and it's okay to be vain. One of the things that we talk about is that aesthetics are not just about vanity, but they are also it is a sign of internal physiological processes. And that's what we talk about today. So we talk about how to reverse some of these hallmarks of aging naturally with a compound called Spermidine. And you are going to be blown away by some of the science. Today, I'm speaking to Leslie Kenny. She, in her 30s, was diagnosed with lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and Hashimoto's, 3 really big autoimmune diseases. And she was told that she had 5 years to live, and she had to give up on her hope of having children. She refused the prognosis, like a true Betty, eliminated inflammatory triggers, and supported her body's healing. And now she's 60 years old. She reports a biological age of 21, autoimmune-disease-free, and has naturally conceived 1 child at 43, and she's the mother of 2. And this is what we are talking about today. We are talking about how we can reverse some of the natural, call it entropy or disorder, that happens as we age if we are not taking the right compounds or moving the right way. And we are talking specifically about a compound called Spermidine today, and how that can reverse 9 of the 12 hallmarks of aging. And we go through this in our conversation. And after speaking with her and knowing her for several years, really do also believe that this compound can really help something that we discuss in the show called Femspan. So there's your little Easter egg to listen out for that. So without further delay, I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Leslie Kenny. All right, Leslie, welcome back to the show. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be back. It's so good to see you, Stephanie.
Let's talk a little bit about Spermidine. I mean, the name is, I think, from a marketing perspective is not the best, but it's like Spermidine, where does it come from? Well, think of the name, but it's present everywhere. So talk to us about what this compound is, how do we get it in our diet? Do we naturally produce it? Like, is it in the colostrum? Like, tell us how and where this comes from.
Sure. So Spermidine was first identified in semen by 17th century Dutch biologist, but actually, all women make it in breast milk. When we are feeding our babies, we give them copious amounts of Spermidine in their breast milk to their babies because it has a very important function sealing up the tight junctions of the gut lining, and it also instructs the 60 to 70% of the immune system that resides in the gut to have an appropriate response to food that is about to come, solid food that will come after breast milk. And when we get older, sort of in our late 20s, we ourselves, because we make it, and all infants make it in their tissues, teenagers make it, but around our late 20s, we stop manufacturing it in our tissues. We can still make it in our gut biome, assuming we've not been exposed to broad spectrum antibiotics and assuming that we have a good diet where we're actually eating not just for ourselves, but we are putting in some undigestible fiber into our diet to feed the gut biota that can actually make more spermidine for us.
So as somebody who's taken multiple rounds of antibiotics for ear infections when she was 4, 5, 6, I probably stopped making it in the gut. If I'm following your logic, like,
Yes.
stop making it in the gut at a very early age.
Yes.
And then at 20, you're saying that we stop making it in tissues sort of systemically. But if you haven't had these multiple rounds of the, I remember the flavor. It was like there was a banana flavor and then there was this pink bubblegum flavor. It was like the pink stuff and the yellow stuff that I would take. It was like amoxicillin. So if you haven't been exposed to those multiple rounds for whatever reason, you can still manufacture it in the gut. But if you're someone like myself who had multiple ear infections as a young child, do we stop making it? Like we destroy the bacteria, I'm assuming, and the flora that are creating it?
You would. It kind of depends on the strains, the types of antibiotics you're taking. So were they broad spectrum and really, like Agent Orange, getting rid of everything in the gut? And like I said, we have the opportunity to make it in our tissues until our late 20s. But the third source of it is in plants. And all plants manufacture spermidine. And as a matter of fact, in the endosperm of all seeds, like wheat germ or rice bran, you will find a high amount of spermidine. And it is there to actually help feed the next generation of the plant. And we can actually take that spermidine and use it to our benefit. And all of the healthy centenarian populations around the world have high amounts of spermidine. So there have been epidemiological studies that show that these individuals have high spermidine-rich diets.
Okay, so tell us what spermidine does then. So we know it helps with cell growth in the child. It helps with closing up tight junctions with the baby, which of course we know they have a very immature gut barrier and immune system at large. But what happens when we are making it? What are there other protective effects? Like it obviously helps with like the hyperpermeability of the gut, but what else does it do?
Well, it decreases inflammation. For instance, it helps with stem cell function. It helps with mitochondrial function. It protects our telomeres. It helps with intracellular communication. It helps with protein folding inside the cell. All in all, it inhibits 9 of the 12 so-called hallmarks of aging, but one of the most important things it does is it activates a cell renewal process called autophagy. Some people call it autophagy, tomato, and that just means self-eating in Greek. But I like to think of it as Marie Kondo for your cells, sparking joy everywhere, decluttering all of your old clothes, inside the cell, and making way for new cells, recycling where it can, taking old parts and turning them into shiny new parts. And it also activates something called mitophagy, which is sparking joy in your mitochondria, the energy houses in your cell. So these are kind of the big concepts, the things that spermidine does that are really amazing. And the team at Oxford was really focused on the immune system. But the more I dug into spermidine, the more convinced I was that people needed to know about this and needed to get more of it in their diet. And if they weren't able to get more of it in their diet, then take a trustworthy food-derived version of it to supplement. And so all of those fancy words aside, what a perimenopausal or menopausal or postmenopausal woman would then experience so let's say we just turn autophagy back on, you have new shiny cells in your ovaries. You have new shiny cells in your uterus. You have new shiny cells in your brain, your bone, your hair follicles, your skin, your nails. All of these things systemically are improving. And let's just look at ovarian reserve. There are a lot of people who say that health span for women should really be called Femspan, that the longer we're fertile, the longer we're going to live. And there have been studies done, these are preclinical studies, on animals that have gone through the menopause, and if you give them more spermidine, they actually produce more eggs and of better quality. For me, as a former IVF patient, I'm always thinking, I think that's a good thing, right? That indicates better overall health of the host, of the mother. And it's very exciting. But, when we look in the mirror and we see our hair color changing, the texture of our hair changing, or our nails becoming brittle and fragile, or our skin becoming dry, these are telltale signs that we always try to intervene on. Let's get the new cream, let's get the new ceramide, or whatever it is. And I'm not saying that those are bad, but I remember watching my mother spend a lot of money on Elizabeth Arden products around menopause. And I'm thinking,
God, that's so funny. I think my mom used the same stuff.
The stuff you break into.
The little pills. The little
pills. Yeah, exactly.
I remember those things.
And I remember my mother said, these are so expensive, but I need them.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing, I'm a big advocate for HRT, if that's the path you want to go down, but I really want all women to feel they deserve to be able to speak to their practitioner about this. But also, spermidine will help. And so there was a Canadian study that used wheat germ-derived spermidine, which comes with the associated polyamines of spermine and the delightfully named putrescine. And
putrescine, please. Yeah.
All named by men. Over a 30-day period, estrogen went up, progesterone went up, cortisol went down, DHEA and pregnenolone, the mother hormone to all of these others, all went up. And in the male cohort, testosterone went up by almost 50%. In the older female cohort, 2/3 of them reported less nocturnal waking to go to the loo. And again, that's another telltale sign. Why am I waking up? Why do I have to go to the loo in the middle of the night? Can I just not sleep through the night? And these are all signs of aging. And when we often go to the doctor will say, yeah, that's just a sign of aging, get used to it. Oh, you don't like your gray hair. I've got some too. Well, I have news for you. I don't want to be like you. I want to stay young for as long as possible. And what spermidine does is it helps with that, with bone protection, hair follicle protection. And I think, Stephanie, when you first started taking this around 5 years ago, you noticed the reversal of some gray hairs, right?
Some grays. I had the obviously brown hair, and then some, gray. And then there was a couple of strands, well, more than a couple of strands, like a clump of hair where it was, if I pulled it, it was at the ends, it was brown, and then there was gray, and then it was brown again. So it was really, really interesting.
I'm so pleased.
Yeah. And this is kind of, it's an overarching, I think that people talk about beauty as just a vain or aesthetic pursuit. And certainly it can be, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it can also be an indicator of physiological status, right? So I love that you're talking about skin, hair, and nails, because I think a lot of women, especially in perimenopause, like 40s and 50s, will notice changes in their hairline, changes in the amount of shedding and the thickness and the density of their hair, dry, very dry skin, or skin that has a different texture than it once did. And to your point, like the cracking of the nails, cracking of the nail beds, all of that kind of stuff. So I really like this almost reframing, if you will, and it very much aligns with my philosophy around this idea of beauty Everybody's beautiful. Everybody has the capacity to express beauty, but it's an expression of their physiological state rather than a comment on, how big your lips are or, whatever, right? I mean, and certainly if any surgical intervention, like all that, like you do you, we love you anyway, but also in tandem and in step with that, there can be things that you can be taking like Spermidine, let's say, that are going to help keep your cells younger for longer. And that's not an aesthetic pursuit, it's a physiological one.
Exactly. And in Asia, in Eastern medicine, hair is actually part of a dashboard that traditional Chinese or Japanese or South Korean practitioners will look at. They will look at your nails for signs. They will look at your tongue. But with hair, in the corners, we have little kids, how they have all those little baby hairs on the fringe.
Baby hairs,
yeah, they're so cute. Well, that is an indication of high spermidine content. And one of the first things people notice when they start taking Primidine again is, oh my gosh, I'm getting these little, little baby hairs at the, the corners of my forehead. I will be 61 in June. I do have some gray that you can probably see here, but I don't dye my hair, which is great.
But your hair is
and
so
I want to keep it like that.
Also, my goodness, your hair is so shiny. That's the one thing I notice about you. Every time I see, I'm like, damn, yeah. It's really good.
And that it's about the age of the hair follicle. So I will give credit to Spermidine and to HRT here.
So what I wanted to do here, Leslie, is I wanted to talk about the 12 different hallmarks of aging, and then we can specifically highlight. So I know you were mentioning it's like decreased inflammation, stem cell, mitophagy, telomere. We can go through each of them, and then maybe also try to relate them to each of the like to our Bettys, to our demographic.
Okay. I'm going to start with impaired autophagy. So there are 3 new hallmarks, and the first one is impaired autophagy because unfortunately, women will experience this earlier than men when we go through menopause at age 50. With less estrogen, you have less autophagy, unfortunately. So that is one of the ways that you will notice this. Another hallmark is inflammation. And I think that women talk about the muffin top and that being inflammatory. The mid-life weight gain that we get, which is inflammatory, that is another hallmark. Gut dysbiosis is a third one. And a lot of women struggle with this. There are so many responsibilities we have, the temptation to not sit and make food for ourselves, but to just grab some ultra-processed food or some more caffeine in the form of a Pepsi or a Coke means
or an energy drink. The
energy drink, right? A Red Bull, exactly.
Yeah.
Then we go to the classic 9 original hallmarks of aging, which include epigenetic changes. So that would be, are the good genes on, the bad genes off? And of course, when we're stressed, the opposite happens. When we are aging prematurely, that doesn't happen. Another one is something called impaired proteostasis. It's protein folding. Again, I like the Marie Kondo analogy. Think of it as your linen closet after you tidy it up and all the towels are folded perfectly. And then when it's not functioning, it's when your teenager gets in there and just pulls the towel from the middle of the stack.
From the bottom.
From the bottom.
From the bottom pile.
Yeah, it just all falls apart. Like nothing functions well. You can't find anything in there. So
that's like the brain fog, though. That's where we get like that loss of proteostasis, I think, is where we have that. Some of that brain fog that a lot of women, because the first symptom of perimenopause is not hot flashes and night sweats, although it can be for some people. But a lot of times it's a bit more subtle than that. It's mood changes, affect, brain fog. Where did I leave my keys? Where did I leave my phone? Why did I walk into this room again? I can't remember. Like I have the word in my head, but I can't actually get it to my mouth. There's a little bit of that, which I think certainly the loss of proteostasis, that protein folding, or that Marie Kondo. I like the reframe on that. The Marie Kondo of everything, putting everything in order and finding joy in your protein cells for sure. But just to kind of tie it to some of the real symptoms that a woman might not necessarily associate with her age or those hallmarks of aging, brain fog. And then, of course, the later, the increased disease risk like Alzheimer's, et cetera, I think is where we see that loss of proteostasis really shine.
Yeah, for sure. And then, we've all talked about not just I can't find my keys, but I'm so tired. I don't think I have the energy to look for my keys in the fridge or in the car or in my coat. And that's due to mitochondrial dysfunction. Our battery packs in our cells are simply they're not up to snuff anymore. Stem cell dysfunction is another one. So we need those stem cells to restore function. Impaired intercellular communication, so communication within the cell itself between, I'll let you do the geeking out here, the endoplasmic reticulum, the proteins, the mitochondria, all of these things that happen inside the cell, kind of like inside a household. In order to function, things have got to work right.
I love the way you explain things. It's so, I would never think to talk about autophagy like the Marie Kondo of your life. It's so good. The one I actually wanted to highlight, because I think a lot of Betties will find maybe some comfort in this, is like the dysregulated nutrient sensing. I think a lot of women start to get more munchy, like they get a little bit more snacky, like they'll eat something and then 45 minutes later, they're searching the pantry for something. Talk to us about sort of what's happening there with that dysregulated nutrient sensing and wrap it in with insulin, like insulin resistance as a function of aging too.
Yeah, so that's really it, is that the insulin response is really not good anymore. And as a result, you're constantly hungry, looking for that next thing, trying to take that hit. And you're getting more and more spikes, inflammatory spikes, when you shouldn't be. So that is an example of the nutrient sensing, constantly feeling you need to grab the donut, the ho-ho, the Pop-Tart, the Cheetos. And even if you are eating better, just the insulin response is not what it should be. Is not what it was when you were younger. You're not able to deal with the toxins and energy hit like say a Twinkie.
Can we talk about mTOR? Can we stop? Can we pause here and just talk about mTOR for a minute too? Because I think that this dysregulated nutrient sensing is important as it relates to spermidine. So I'm happy. So for those of you that have never heard of mTOR, mechanistic target of rapamycin. What did they used to call it? Mammalian target of
mammalian target. Yeah.
So mechanistic is, for whatever reason they changed the name, but anyway, that's what it stands for those of you that want the full name. But it's basically a protein, or proteins, I should say, acting inside cells, acting like a master switch for either growth or metabolism, right? So when your nutrients, particularly protein, is really high, mTOR is going to turn on to build. So it's going to build muscle, it's going to build new cells. When nutrients are low, so let's say when you're fasting, or maybe you're restricting a certain group, like let's say a ketogenic diet where you're restricting carbohydrates, your mTOR turns off. And this is when the body will enter that autophagy that you've been, the Marie Kondoing, right? So we're getting rid of these old cells that don't bring us joy anymore and making room for the cells that are working properly and potentially even new cells. So talk to us a little bit about, so that's sort of the back of the envelope explanation of what mTOR is. But as it relates to spermidine, talk to us about how spermidine specifically works on mTOR, because I think it's my understanding is a little bit different than how I just explained it.
It is. I'm so glad you brought this up. I like to think of mTOR as TOR, the door to muscle. M is the muscle. And there's so many things like fasting, metformin, rapamycin that activate autophagy by inhibiting that doorway to muscle. But the problem is, and why bodybuilders don't like this, is that you will sacrifice muscle. So yes, you get shiny new cells, but you're not going to get swole. And with very, very frail people, for instance, my mother, who's 85 pounds and 86 years old, said, I've heard all about fasting. I really want to fast. I think it will be good for me. I've had to say, please do not do that, because you have hardly any muscle left. And if you fast, you will lose your muscle, because the first thing that the body will do in a fasted state is it's going to go straight for the muscle. And this is also what happens if you are taking rapamycin and you're taking, say, metformin. But the beauty of
Or you're not eating enough. Or you're
not eating enough.
Yeah, just generally.
But But the beauty of spermidine is that you can activate autophagy by not inhibiting mTOR. It uses a different pathway to activate that cell renewal process. So it's almost like Marie Kondo has a special back door into the house. She's got the key to the garden door. She can go in and clean the house for you, and you can continue to build muscle. And that's why I love it, because it is one of those things that people take for granted in midlife is muscle, but we are losing muscle every single year, and we do not want to get frail. We do not want to lose our independence, right? The fastest way to the nursing home is not being able to sit down and stand up from the loo. That's what my colleague, Sir Muir Gray, always says, and he has been writing textbooks about preventive medicine for GPs in Britain for 40 years, and he always talks about this. It is as simple as that. If you cannot sit down and get up, you are going to the nursing home. And I think that we've got to do everything we can to preserve our muscle so we can preserve our independence.
Okay, so well said. Well, you mentioned earlier, I wrote it down in my notes, that spermidine affects 9 of the 12 hallmarks of aging, which in and of itself is a pretty remarkable claim, because most interventions, even pharmaceutical ones like the rapamycin that you meant, like they usually just will target a single pathway. Like it's very, in and out, right? So we're trying to get one thing right in a very complex system. So maybe my question here is explaining to myself and the Bettys how this food-derived molecule can influence like it's a panacea, like how it can influence so many aging mechanisms all at once. Like, why is spermidine so different than any other intervention that we've seen that's trying to reduce or slow down or reverse aging?
Well, I hate to say that it does so much, because then people think, oh, how can this be possible? It's too good to be true. I will just make one correction. Rapamycin is neck and neck with spermidine. The only thing is that rapamycin does not occur in plants. We don't make it in our bodies, and we don't have safety studies done in humans for aging. We use rapamycin as an immune suppressant, like a very powerful immune suppressant in organ transplant patients, so they do not reject the donated organs that they've been given. And the dose for rapamycin, it's a kind of unique Goldilocks zone for you. Everybody is a different weight, has a different, ethnic background, has a different epigenome, there are different sexes, and you have to take all of these things into mind when you think of what the right dose is. And I meet so many biohackers who tried it like a street drug, because it's not available for us to just take safely. And I think 5 milligrams is the amount that they say to take. And so many people tell me, oh, all my hair fell out, or I got these open mouth sores, or my libido went down. And I keep thinking, I don't think that's right. And there are no side effects like this with spermidine. In fact, it's the opposite that happens. And the body has co-evolved with plants over millennia. Plants have spermidine. Let's eat more plants. Or if we want to supplement, let's get them from plants and supplement that way, because there are no safety or efficacy trials in synthetic spermidine yet. I think there's one safety study only in men for 28 days, which is crazy to me that this stuff is all over the market, just like rapamycin. Synthetic spermidine is everywhere. Counterfeits are rife. There are loads of companies that are selling teeny tiny amount of wheat germ, and then they cut with synthetic spermidine, and you can see it in their lab test because they have no presence of spermine or putrescine, or maybe they have added in some synthetic spermine and there's zero putrescine, which is not how it occurs in nature. Or they are using AI to counterfeit their lab test, which is also terrible.
Oh, that's the next big problem with AI, isn't it? Hey, is like the the lab results. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, it's really tragic. Sorry to get on my soapbox there for a minute.
No, it's fine. Well, I mean, before we even talk about supplementing, where can we get it in our diet? So you mentioned wheat germ.
Oh, yes.
Like there was a Canadian study, you mentioned wheat germ. Where can we get it in our regular diet so that we're getting the whole form of it? And then, of course, we can talk about supplementation as well.
Legumes, mushrooms, whole grains like whole wheat, leafy greens, and you can get it in fermented foods like cheese, aged cheeses, assuming you don't have a problem with histamine load, because some people might have a mast cell activation with that.
Mm-hmm. It's like a Parmesan, like a Parmigiano Reggiano, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So you can make a really nice risotto. It could be a resistant starch risotto where you've, cooled the rice overnight, and then you add in shiitake or oyster mushrooms. They have really high amounts. And you could add in some peas and then take the Parmesan closer to the rind. And that is where the higher spermidine levels will be. And that would be a really nice spermidine-rich dish. And one of my favorite snacks is actually sprouts. So I love sprouted beans. And I'll just take them, maybe add some olive oil, some really good extra virgin olive oil, some salt, maybe a little bit of olive tapenade. Just kind of depends on how salty I want it. And that will have a lot of naturally occurring spermidine too.
And is there a dosage that we're trying to consume daily? So if we had that beautiful risotto that you just described, approximately how much of this are we getting in spermidine? And if it's impossible to tell, like what is an optimal or recommended dosage that we're taking in daily?
So it really depends, because if you look at those foods and you take the average of what they should be, so let's just say peas. Up in Scotland, mushy peas is a delicacy and would be a good source of spermidine. You might say that having a serving of mushy peas might give you 10 milligrams. And they say you would want to have a dosage closer to, say, 30 or 35. But the reality is you're not going to necessarily absorb all of that once it goes through the digestive tract. And that's where it gets a little bit murky. We don't have the test kits to diagnose what somebody's spermidine level or evaluate what someone's spermidine levels are at home or in the lab easily. It's still very convoluted. We know it's important. We can kind of guess what the amount is in the daily diet. So in the US and in the UK, I think people get around 8 milligrams of spermidine every day if they eat sort of okay. But you would ideally want, you would want to have more plants with more sources. The problem then becomes absorbability. And that's where supplementation can help.
Okay. And before we get to supplementation, because I just had a thought as you were talking, some of the hallmarks of aging, we see those also improved with lifestyle, right? So are there other ways that we can potentially augment or help some of these hallmarks of aging in addition to what we're talking about with the spermidine?
100%. So I'm going to focus in on sleep. When we sleep and we get deep sleep, that's when the glymphatic system works and we take toxins out of the brain. But we will get deep autophagy then if we can get into that state. And one of the good ways to do this is by exposing ourselves to light. And a fascinating fact that I learned from a very cool professor at a medical school in Germany named Angela Relogio is that the photoreceptors in our eyes that are just there to sync our pituitary with daylight. And by the way, even if it's an overcast day in Canada or the UK, you will get more lux light exposure outside than inside. So still go outside, please. Those photoreceptors get older and less functional as we age. And women, unfortunately, when we go through menopause, those photoreceptors really go off a cliff in terms of function. HRT can help rescue that. but we need more sunlight exposure, and the more our daylight exposure, let's call it just daylight exposure. The more daylight exposure we get, then the greater the likelihood of us producing more melatonin at the right time in the evening so that we are set up for that nice glide path to sleep. And of course, block the light, the blue light from your devices, your TV set. I don't know about you, I've been watching Vladimir on Netflix. I'm like, oh, I really don't want to have to cut off the color here, but okay, I'll do it. Because you need to make sure that you're able to produce the melatonin, have the good deep sleep, and get some natural autophagy that way.
Okay, let's come back to supplementation. So you've mentioned that there's lots of counterfeits, that we see the spermidine, not with the spermine and the putrescine. If we're thinking, yes, we want to supplement with spermidine, we don't know if we're getting enough in the diet. You're someone who lives in the United States or Canada, the UK, you're probably getting an average of 8 mgs a day when we want it to be much higher. How do we know how to choose the right brand?
You want to look and see if it is, number one, food-derived. If it is synthetic, it might say spermidine HCl, hydrochloric acid, or spermidine TCl trichloride, or 3CL is the same thing. And sometimes I see really clever labels where it says wheat germ with spermidine, and that actually is wheat germ with synthetic spermidine, but they don't actually disclose it. So then you have to look at their lab test, and you're looking for, especially if it's wheat germ, you want to make sure you see putrescine and spermine. So I happen to see, we are always testing competitors, and one came back, some results came back from Eurofins today, and they had spermine. They had 0 putrescine. And I thought, I'm really surprised because normally you have more putrescine and less spermine. So what they've done is they've added some synthetic spermine to pop it up. But this is evidence that this is not actually a food-derived product. And again, because there are no safety studies or efficacy studies for these synthetic products for women, I would not feel comfortable recommending them. And it's the reason why I went down the wholly plant-derived route.
It's so interesting to me because you went to Oxford trained scientists to understand your own recovery, and you, not a doctor, it was you who connected the idea between spermidine and women's longevity, commercially. So what happens when a woman decides not to believe what she's been told about her body? And I'm talking, of course, about you. And I would love for you to share with the audience the diagnoses, is that a plural? The diagnoses that you received, the multiples, and what you did in that moment when you were receiving that horrible news, and what you decided to do about it.
Sure. In 2004, at age 39, I was in the middle of trying to start a family, and I had already done 5 rounds of IVF. My doctors had essentially told me I was infertile, my eggs were no longer viable, and so I would need to find a donor. And then at the same time, I noticed some terrible pain in my hands and thought, well, I'd better get that looked into. I think we women are pretty good at checking things out. And
we're the original biohackers.
We're the original biohackers. We women really are. And I got that phone call nobody wants to get, which is not from the receptionist at the doctor's office saying, your blood tests are back and they're fine. But the call from the doctor saying, your results are in and I'd like you to come in to have a chat. And so I went in still thinking about this IVF round, this 5th IVF round using donor eggs and having a baby. And my doctor sits me down and says, you've got rheumatoid arthritis and your immune system is so strong, it's attacking your your organs, your joints. And I, of course, say, wait a second, aren't we supposed to have really strong immune systems? Isn't that like a good thing? And I want it to fight cancer, right? And she says, no, actually, in this case, it looks like you're fighting cancer, but you're directing all of that firepower at destroying your joints. And that's where you're getting this pain from. But don't worry, we've got a solution, which is immune suppressants, which you can inject yourself with. And that pain is going to go away. And we'll be able to halt the damage before it gets too bad. So I'm thinking, how is this going to affect this IVF round? This can't be good. And while I'm thinking this, she moves on to something else that I have. You also have lupus. And I've never heard of this, so I want to know what it is. And she says, well, this is where it's not just destroying your joints, it's going after your organs and tissues. And I said, all right, well, what's the solution for that? And she said, unfortunately, there is no treatment, there is no cure, and you should expect this to get worse over time. And I'm thinking, hold on a second. I've got this embryo transfer coming up. You're telling me to inject myself with immune suppressants, and then you're telling me that I've got something else that's only going to get worse over time? How is this going to affect me getting pregnant? And this isn't really acceptable. You're the doctor. You have all these certificates lined up behind you on the wall. I need you to get on board here and fix this, because that's how I think a lot of Americans view doctors. When the wheels fall off, they will put the wheels back on and they will fix us. And it's a transaction. We pay them. And I really pushed her hard, saying, look, here's how it is. I'm paying you to fix my problem, and now you had better do it, because I've got this embryo transfer coming up. And to her credit, she took it all in without my little angry tirade. She didn't flinch, but she was quiet. And then she shook her head and said, I wouldn't do the IVF if I were you. You've only got a good 5 years left. And those words really...
You only have a good 5 years left of what? Your life?
Of my life. And I really had no comeback. And kind of staggered out of the doctor's office thinking, what does this mean? What does this mean? What about my baby? And I was very lucky that in that moment, the voice of my no-nonsense Midwestern grandmother, who had sadly passed away, came to me, and I heard her say, let's throw the kitchen sink at it. And I decided in that moment that I would just become the absolute best patient there was. And so I started delving into the science. And the first place that I went was the patient chat rooms that I had relied on heavily for IVF. I think a lot of us women who have been through IVF, we all go to the chat boards, we all cycle together, we get to know each other, we share tips and console each other when it doesn't work out. And I did the same with the rheumatoid arthritis boards and the lupus boards. And on the RA boards, I met a lot of patients who said, we've been on these immune suppressing drugs for years. And this is 2004, by the way, so I think things may have moved on. But at that time, that was the gold standard. And they were noticing that it only worked for around 18 months, and then they would just fail, and they'd be put on new immune suppressing drugs, and it was like a merry-go-round. So it seemed to me, as the casual observer, that the body did not like these drugs and was doing everything it could to get around them. Then over on the lupus boards, I was meeting patients who were very excited because although there was no treatment, they had heard about a protocol, a therapy that had been used in Germany a few years before called intravenous immunoglobulin. And that had improved all 13 lupus patients to whom it had been given. And this was really great news for me because it was proof that my doctor was wrong. She had said I should expect things to get worse over time. But this was clearly not true if these 13 patients, every single one was improving. So I went back to my doctor. I said, hey, there's this 13 patients. And of course, as you know, as a doctor, 13 patients does not give definitive proof. It's too small of a cohort. And she refused to give it to me. But back to the patient boards where people said, look, there's this guy in San Francisco who will do it. And so I went to him, got the transfusions, and at the same time, I completely changed my lifestyle. I used the work of Dr. Barry Sears. He had a book out called The Anti-Aging Zone. It came out in 2005. And it was all about how autoimmune patients, among other patients, were prematurely aging themselves through inflammation. This was what Italian scientist Claudio Franceschi called inflammaging. And so we might be chronologically 39, but biologically we were a lot older. And so the Sears book was all about bringing in foods that are anti-inflammatory and getting rid of the things that are inflammatory. So he suggested an allergy test. I took it, gluten, dairy, eggs, all no-goes. And it was really hard at the time to think of a diet. You know, gluten-free stuff is everywhere now. Dairy-free options are everywhere.
Yeah, but 2004, you're not going to have, that's not going to be widespread as it is today.
It wasn't widespread. And I was living in Boulder, Colorado, which has a really big health food culture. And it was still so hard. And I remember asking at restaurants, do you have gluten-free or dairy-free? And people still looking at me like I had two heads.
What? Yeah.
The other thing that I forgot to mention is that saying that Brene Brown always asks us to ask, is that really true? And I think more and more women are realizing they shouldn't silence their voice. And, whether it's a negative thought that pops in their head or a negative thought that somebody else plants there, is that really true, is powerful for us?
Yeah, I agree because I know we're describing 2004, but even today in 2026, I have so many women. We see it in our help desk, in our support inbox. Doctors are refusing to run blood tests. There's no, like the one that comes up a lot is thyroid, right? It's like my
so
doctor is not going to, it's like, but they will not run the antibody test. They just want to look at TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, maybe some free T4 and T3, but literally that's it. Like they will not look at reverse T3. They will not look at any of these other markers that might be a bit more diagnostic for Hashimoto's thyroiditis or even just hypothyroidism.
Yeah.
So we still have that today where you can have these chat boards like Reddit or wherever. You have these chat boards where people are sharing information and then you take it to your doctor and they will just bold face, straight face, like there's no evidence, like your doctor did it too. Like there's no evidence to support that. Like we're not giving you that IV immunoglobulin treatment because it's an N of 13. And that's not enough to justify it. I'm not willing to take that risk with my own license or my own practice habits. So I'm just not going to do it. And we see that even today. And there's another thing that I often talk about, which is like this idea of infobesity, right? Where it's like we are almost inundated with too much information in 26, where maybe in 2004, you were just like, we were just starving for it. And so I think it's really hard for women to sort of parse through, even on, I see this all the time on social media, what is true and what isn't true, right? I still have people that are scared of carbohydrates, it's like they will not eat kale because they think that kale is out to get them. And we're not gonna name the people who kind of propagate that because it's not necessary. But there's people that think that plants are trying to kill them. So how do we, as women, when we are so desperate for information and we're so desperate for people to just believe us and believe our stories, what were some of the things that you were able to parse through that maybe felt like they were true for you or that you felt worth exploring? Because I'm sure you came across things that you're like, well, I don't know, I'm not going to try that. Like that doesn't, I'm not going to do I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, like a colon cleanse or whatever for my lupus, like what was your decision tree? Like how did you deduce whether things were worth exploring or not? What was your thought process there?
When I went to the chat rooms, what I noticed first off was the empathy. I saw other patients who were devastated, who were so fatigued, in so much pain, no longer able to work, not sure where they would get the money to make the rent. And I saw all of these other compassionate, to be honest, women, because 80% of autoimmune patients are women. These other women rushing in to say, hey, look, what about this? Or I know where you're coming from. I hear you. I see you. And other people saying, try this doctor. So there was a lot of emotional support, compassion, as well as practical information. And I would notice that over and over again, there were certain voices that were coming in with a lot of calm and a lot of reason saying, have you looked at this? Look at this study. This is inspiring for us. This could be the chance that we've all been waiting for. And you get to know voices. And that was my approach. I can't speak to how it is today with AI bots and things, but that's how it was for me. And the evidence bore itself out. I was able to find the study. It wasn't easy. And that's when I was able to take that printed document and take it to my doctor and say, what about this? Can't we do something? What do you think of this? And, like I said, it wasn't surprising that she said no, because I also spoke to a lot of immunologists in the UK and the US who all said, hey, this is so risky because it's a transfusion of antibodies from anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 people, and any one of them could have mad cow disease or hepatitis C. And in 2004, 2005, there was no cure for hep C, and we didn't really know how to effectively find prions, which make Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. So I do recognize that it was a risk, but maybe I'm a bit of a risk taker. And in my case, it worked out.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel your pain, and I feel the pain of women who are searching for answers where they have, essentially delegated the decision-making to their doctor, right? And if their doctor is on board with them, or their doctor is willing to explore things with them, great. But if their doctor is like the original doctor that you came across where they're like, it's risky, I'm not sure, I don't know, and then they plant those seeds of doubt into the patient, it can make it that really, really difficult for the patient to say, okay, I'm going to now go essentially against what my doctor's recommendation is. Like, so I really feel for the women, like I feel for you. I'm obviously thrilled that it worked out for you, but I know that there's people listening, and maybe that this podcast is being forwarded to, where there are women who are trying to find answers, and the cultural authority, the doctor, is saying there's nothing we can do for you. And so they have to somehow either find it with themselves. Thank God for your grandmother, right? Thank God for grandmothers in general. But, that voice of the grandmother saying, let's throw everything at it. It could be your grandmother. It could just be like the ancestors, like your foremothers from before, that little whisper of intuition. I would encourage anybody to try and listen to that whisper, to try, if there's something that doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. It's probably not right. And that means, unfortunately, that you have to put on your big girl pants, and you have to find these chat forums, and you have to go on social media and sift through what can seem like endless amount of information. But I think that pursuit is worthy of doing. I think that energy output, that time, that effort, that focus, potentially money, I think that is an investment well spent, because it can lead to the outcome that you're describing, where you found this like very niche study, very potentially dangerous intervention that ended up being the right decision for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So you take this this IV immunoglobulin. And then I think you mentioned at the same time you were following, I guess, the recommendation of Dr. Sears in his book, and he was talking about premature aging. So tell me specifically, what are some of the pearls? Like, what are some of the things that you implemented from that book? And then, I mean, I know you're a mom, so I know that there's a happy ending. So
it worked out. There's the result.
So tell us the process there.
So yes, while I was arranging to get the IVIG, I thought, well, that will reset my immune system. So what they noticed was that IVIG it modulates the immune system. You know, we're used to adaptogens like ashwagandha for hormones, but for the immune system, you can modulate the immune system, calm it down. So it wasn't just providing antibodies for people who couldn't make them to strengthen their immune systems, but in people who were overactive, it would tamp down that overactivity. And I thought, right, if I'm resetting, I need to make sure I never introduce triggers ever again. So what are my triggers? And Dr. Barry Sears's book, The Anti-Aging Zone, recommended getting allergy testing to identify those triggers, which I did. Dairy, gluten, and eggs were all offenders, and I eliminated all of those and came up with substitutes for everything. People say it's so hard, but you know, when you want to live, and in my case, I still desperately wanted to have a baby, I didn't want to let go of that dream. I was willing to be incredibly disciplined. And at the same time, Sears argued that there are other triggers to the immune system that we might not necessarily think of, like stress and poor sleep and lack of movement and lack of social connection. Trauma could also be something. And if any of your listeners have come across the ACE scoring system for childhood trauma, you can identify whether or not you're sort of in the potentially affected by trauma category. So I not only overhauled my diet, sleep, movement, but I did trauma therapy too. And when you let go of all of that, it can be incredibly freeing, but it can actually get your vagus nerve back to a place of equilibrium where you're able to actually rest and repair. So all of those things were happening while I was getting the IVIG transfusions lined up. And I was still injecting myself with, different times I was doing Enbrel or Humira. And when I finished my second IVIG treatment, I had explored so many different alternative therapies, and I was open to everything, but I hated the injections of the immune suppressants because philosophically, the idea of suppressing my immune system made zero sense to me. So I stopped under supervision. I stopped taking doing the injections of the Enbrel, Humira, which I can't remember which one it was at that point in time. And I went back in for a routine test with my doctor, routine appointment. And she opened my file and had clearly not taken a look at it before she sat down. And she just looked at it and said, well, look at that. You don't have lupus or RA. And I was like,
just
what?
Like flippant like that, right?
Yeah.
Like you have 5 years to live. And then the next appointment, oh, look at that. You're good.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I was like, excuse me? Am I in the right appointment room here?
Yeah,
what did you just say?
Yeah,
and she didn't even look up at me. She just said, all your labs have returned to normal. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I was so excited.
See, I hear that and I get enraged. I hear it's like, oh, really? Yeah, I did all this work. You did not. I had to go to San Francisco and did all this stuff. And just a flippant, like, I mean, I know you have a better attitude than I do.
Well,
you're like, yay. And I'm like, damn you, woman.
Yeah. Well, I was excited because of the outcome. But then I said, in my excitement and enthusiasm, do you want to know what I did?
Yeah.
And she didn't even look up. She was like, no, that's okay. And I thought that's a lost opportunity. And it goes back to this idea of the sisterhood. Wait a second. You are the you are the node for potentially thousands of patients, 80% of whom are going to be women. And I don't want these women to end up on the chat boards. I want you to be the node of knowledge. And I need to transfer this knowledge to you. But in her world, the system does not give her the opportunity to process that knowledge. And she probably gets people who are like, I went under a crystal and I cured myself. Some aliens came down and cured me, right? There could be that. But I still have always felt like that was a travesty of justice. This should not have happened. And
I think it stings more too that she was a female doctor too. Like you almost, for me, this is, you can come at me at the comments here, but I almost feel like you would expect that more from a male doctor who's like seen it all, done it all, full of hubris, knows what he knows. It's unfortunate that you hear that with female doctors. So it's like, male and female, we're all guilty of it. Sometimes we have we're blinded, but for her to have just like no interest in your story, or even just some of the things that you did, even just from a nutritional perspective, like forget the IVIG, forget that. Just from I found that I was triggering and flaring up my immune system when I had these foods. I think could have been, the missed opportunity for sure. Yeah.
So after that, I confess that while I did tell other patients on the lupus boards that it had worked for me, I honestly wanted to forget everything that had happened to me before. And during this time, I had learned that my 5th IVF had failed. And I really had to let go of my dreams of becoming a biological mother. And I just wanted to let all of it go. The failure of my body to conceive a baby, the failure of my body to do the right thing and instead attack me. So I focused entirely on becoming a mother. I just wanted to have a baby at the end of it. So I became an adoptive mother. And everything was, please just get me back to normal. I want to be normal. I don't want to be that small percentage of people for whom everything bad happens. Because that's what's happening. I'm infertile. What percentage of women at this age are that? I'm always in that category. So that's really where I was. And, fast forward a few years, and 2007, I'm noticing that I am really, really, really tired. And I see other mothers with their kids. They've got 3 or 4 kids. They've got a dog. They've got a scout troop. They have an allotment. They're on the PTA, and I'm thinking, how do these women do it? And again, I go back to the chat boards and put in, first of all, I go to Dr. Google, I put in every symptom I can think of: cold hands, cold feet, brain fog, constant fatigue, faintness, dizziness, and it spits out hypothyroid, hypothyroid, hypothyroid. I go to my GP who says, nope, your thyroid levels are normal. That's based on TSH and T4. I then pay for an expensive...
Hard eye roll here. Yeah.
Hard eye roll, yeah.
Eye roll here, yeah.
Yeah. I then go to a fancy private London endocrinologist, Cambridge grad, and same thing. You're fine. TSH, T4, totally fine. I go back to the chat boards. Everybody says, you're being fobbed off. There's only one man in Britain who can help you. So at this point, I've moved from Colorado to London. And it was a fellow who had almost been struck off, but who had successfully worked as a GP treating thyroid conditions with natural desiccated thyroid and also levothyroxine and T3 for decades. So I went to see him. He had me do a cortisol test ahead of time. And he looked at my cortisol numbers and said he had never seen such low cortisol. He had no idea how I had even taken the train to get to him, to the appointment. He didn't know how I was able to stand up. And, my hands were so cold to the touch when he shook my hand. My reflexes were terrible. My standing blood pressure was very, very low, much lower than my sitting blood pressure. And he basically said, I'm going to tell you what you can do. I've given up my medical license, but I'm a nutritionist now, and I can tell you how you can get the treatment you need online. So he showed me how to get the Armour thyroid and how to essentially take my pulse and my basal body temperature in the morning before rising so that I could check how much I needed and when it was too high a dose. And he said as I left the appointment, now, if you don't want to have more children because you're so tired taking care of the child you have already, you need to take precautions because you're now going to be hyperfertile. All of your hormones are going to be aligned. And I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I've spent over $100,000 on IVF treatments, on donor eggs, on acupuncture and wheatgrass shots, and just everything to make myself better. I don't believe you. Long story short, a few weeks later, I'm on his protocol, and a full moon comes along to your full moon point. And I had noticed that, my cycle would always come either at a full moon or at a half moon. And I thought, this is really weird. Why has my cycle not come and it's a full moon? And I took a pregnancy test, and sure enough, I was pregnant, and that man was right. And what it showed me was that, again, as a patient, we go and we say, we have these symptoms. My symptoms were rheumatology symptoms, arthritis, pain in my hands. So a rheumatologist looks at me and stays in his or her lane and says, right, the diseases I know about are lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, but never looks at the other normally co-occurring diseases that come with those two. And a big one is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So when they actually come to ultrasound my thyroid, whoa, guess what? There's about an eighth of it left. So now we know what has happened. And, I then give birth to my wonderful second daughter, and I'm fully enjoying my life now in Oxford, England, on the school playground, and talking to lots of other parents, and end up, through meeting these scientists at the school gates, meeting some amazing scientists at the University of Oxford who are working in rheumatology on the immune system and how to reverse elderly immune senescence. So zombie cells, zombie immune cells, dysfunctional immune cells in the elderly, but the reality is that at 39, my immune cells were dysfunctional and were elderly. So that piqued my interest, and that's when I started diving deep on this weirdly named compound called spermidine that we all produce when we're young, and that's in all plants. And yes, it is in sperm, and it is in breast milk. It is that important to the success of the next generation.
I mean, I have to say, I love your story for so many reasons. One, your perseverance. I think there is something with women who decide, like, I didn't have the same fertility challenges that you're describing, but I remember when I wanted to have a baby, it was like, I need to get pregnant now. Like, I need this shop to be open for business now. And I remember the first month that we were trying, it didn't work. And I mean, I can't even imagine the amount of stress and grief and rage and all of the things that you're describing as you're talking about your journey. But I also just want to applaud you for your perseverance. I want to applaud your grandmother who came to talk to you in some way that was like, we're going to throw everything at this, because at the end of the day, it was worth it, right? So again, coming back to this idea of like, yes, it's like the chat boards and the weird stuff that you're going to come across, all of that, you have to have this North Star, which is, in your case, I want to be a mother. And you were able to be a mother 2 times over. Like, what a blessing for your first child. You wouldn't have your first child if you weren't like, okay, I got to just fix my body, and then find out that you have, a third autoimmune condition, the Hashimoto's, and then conceive naturally for your second child. So I just love that for you. And I hope that for someone who's listening, who's had fertility issues, that this provides, or maybe now, because we know that women are having babies later and later and later. I have women on my team, first baby at 42, right? And you were describing a woman who is 50, right? Still holding space for that opportunity. So I just love that for you. And I hope that it can land with someone who's listening, or maybe this is shared with someone who is on her own fertility journey, to just not give up and to keep pushing and pushing and pushing until, you're pushing on the on the delivery table.
Pushing the baby out.
You're pushing the baby out. Yeah, exactly. I would love for you to talk about why should we trust Promidine over, is there a way for us to say, okay, I know there's enough putrescine, enough spermidine, what should we be looking for on the label that tells us that this is going to be doing all the things that we've been talking about today?
Well, in addition to looking out for the synthetic versions, I think, look at the trouble the founders go to, right? We go to Japan. I go to Japan. With our gluten-free version, I work with 3 different sets of farmers. I have to specially commission the gluten-free version of chlorella that we use for that spermidine. And I go and I inspect the fields of the turmeric farmers and the Okinawan lime peel orchard farmers. And I have a very young farmer who does the turmeric named Hiro, and very sweet, married to a Polish girl. They've got 6 adorable children. But he always is so proud of the weeds in his fields, because it shows that there are no pesticides on his crops. And the reason why is, after the Americans went into Okinawa after the Second World War, they not only brought the soldiers, but they brought glyphosate with Monsanto, with the seeds. And he always says that those farmers got a lot of cancer. And so the young farmers have refused to use glyphosate. And it's a point of pride to use soil that has been rehabilitated, that doesn't have the glyphosate. And this is volcanically rich soil. It is made up of not only volcanic material, but also coral. It's so unique and makes it really, really rich and nutrient dense. And then, when we are growing the chlorella in the pond, I have actually gone to visit the source of the water, which is mineral water from a mountain, where it's all comes through a natural volcanic purification process, and then is brought to these ponds that have been built where we actually grow the chlorella. So it's steps like that I think inspire trust in other people who are like, okay, this person has actually done their homework. They have actually gone to visit where this is from. They are not just buying street drugs in bags from China, or they're not just taking street drugs in China and having somebody encapsulate, bottle, and label in China, which I have had a lot of people ask me to do. Put it up on Amazon.
Yeah.
And say that it's something that it isn't. The same thing goes with the wheat germ. So there are a lot of opportunities to get wheat germ derived spermidine, but are you actually removing the omega-6 fatty acids that go rancid so quickly in that spermidine, which is what we do. And the reason that I want to do it is because the outer layer of the cell is made up of lipids or fats, and guess where those fats come from? Well, what you eat. And if you're eating a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, which we tend to get a lot of anyway, an imbalance with omega-3s because of their existence in processed foods, if you are getting not just more omega-6, but it's rancid, and some of these capsules, you can actually see they begin to form a gelatinous plug in the capsule. And some of those manufacturers color the capsules, so you can't see the gelatinous plug. But, we actually take the extra step to remove those fatty acids that go rancid on exposure to oxygen. So I would look for things like that. It's kind of like, when you want to buy a really well-made piece of clothing from from a designer, right? You're looking at the stitching, you're looking not just the design, but you're looking at the quality of the material. And that's what I hope I'm doing for everybody out there.
And I think there's some good news, if I'm not mistaken, for Canadians who always seem to get the short end of the stick, unfortunately.
Yes.
Canadians
So the good news is that, already 5 years ago, we knew we wanted to be in Canada because we had so many fans there. And we looked at manufacturing and warehousing in Canada. But the problem was we needed to meet the stringent requirements of Health Canada. And it took us 3 years to get that. Yeah. And so now we have it for Promidine Original, our wheat germ-derived product. And that's in capsules. But we just got our Health Canada approval for the powder. So the powder pouch has 3 months of just powder, and you can mix it in with yogurt or acai bowls or, porridge or, your chia seed pudding.
On top of your wheat germ.
Yeah.
Put it on top of your wheat germ.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really great way to, people are so tired of pills, right? And it's a really easy way to take it. And, if you put it into fizzy water, it fizzes, so it disperses more easily. Or you could put it in with like an effervescent tablet if you're taking it, say, with the first food of the morning. I always say bookend it. Take it with the last food of the evening to kickstart autophagy overnight, or take it with the first food of the morning to extend the benefits of overnight autophagy. And so, there are lots of different ways that you can take it. I've mixed it with everything from matcha to I like it with my acai bowl.
Matcha's a good idea. Oh, I didn't think of that. Okay, sorry, go on. I'm I'm going to use it with my matcha. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So the thing about matcha is it's in a shallow bowl, so it cools down relatively quickly, and you're whisking it, right? So because of the fact that this is it is heat sensitive, we have to make sure that you're not putting it into a liquid that is over 41 degrees Celsius. I can't remember what that is in Fahrenheit. I want to say 105, around about there.
Okay. So nothing over 105 Fahrenheit or 41 Celsius?
Yes, exactly.
So don't put it in your coffee in the morning.
No, but you can put it in your smoothie, right? And it actually tastes great. And we are just waiting for Health Canada to approve our gluten-free application, which I think has been in there for about 1.5 years. So at some
Health
point...
Canada is one of the toughest places in the world to get a product approved. I can't tell you how many, even just American brands that want to come into Canada and just don't because of... this firsthand of what you have, like the hoops that they make you jump through. So as we're kind of winding this down here, what do you see next in terms of like the next 5 years of research for Spermidine?
Well, there's some super exciting research out of Japan from a Nobel laureate named Tasuku Honjo. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2018. For his work on immunotherapy and checkpoint inhibitors for cancer. And he actually has co-authored several papers in the last few years on Spermidine for potentiating immune surveillance. Basically, the papers are wild. They have great names like an old molecule with a new anti-aging immune function. That's a great title. I couldn't write better myself. And he really, he's done a lot of preclinical work showing that this together, Spermidine together with, say, immunotherapy is really potent for cancer in elderly mice. Now, this is preclinical, so I want, I hasten to add for any layperson who doesn't know, we can't say that this is going to work for humans because preclinical is, it's animal research, but it looks good. And I've never heard of an oncologist that said, please stop eating plants. You're not allowed to eat plants while you're doing cancer therapy. I think that this is just incredibly exciting. And then, of course, the research at Oxford on how it reverses immune senescence. So the 9 hallmarks of aging that I touched on, I didn't include senescent cells. But certainly with immune cells, Spermidine has been shown to reverse zombie immune cells, and it could potentially do that in other systems of the body as well. So I am excited for that. And this whole idea around staying younger, or let's say staying younger for longer, it's not just necessarily about younger, it's just staying healthier for longer, I guess. I want my wisdom from being around the planet 60 years, but yeah, I just want to stay a youthful or healthy.
That Femspan, that
60,
Femspan.
that Femspan. Yeah, exactly.
So if people want to find out more about you, they want to find out more about Promidine, where can we send them?
Oxford Health Span, all one word. And of course, especially for all the Bettys out there, if you go to oxfordhealthspan.com/Dr. Stephanie, you will get 20% off. So some savings are especially for Canadian Bettys, no tariffs, and a little discount there for you too.
Thank you. That is very, very generous. We will make sure to have all of those links in the show notes. Leslie, it is such a delight I love the way that you make science so easy to understand. I would never, when I was explaining mTOR, you're like, well, think about it, the door to muscle. I'm like, why is that so simple? That is the best way. That is the best way to explain it. It takes a lot of intelligence to simplify things in an elegant way that everybody can understand. So I just want to acknowledge that in you. And thank you so much for sharing a very personal and vulnerable story with us. And I know that you're going to inspire lots of Bettys who are listening who are also on a similar journey to continue on with that, as well as giving us a tool. It seems like the Swiss Army knife, really, for aging in Spermidine and how we can increase our Femspan and stay better and younger for longer. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right, friends, welcome to the after party where I tell you what I really thought of this episode. And this is Leslie's second time coming on the show. We talked about Spermidine on the first show, and I really appreciate, I said it to her right at the end, but I really appreciate how she breaks very complex science into very easy to understand terms so everybody can be included in the conversation. Like, I really don't like this idea that you have to have some sort of medical degree to be able to participate in your own healthcare like that. So I really want to give her kudos to that. I think that the concept of autophagy, like Marie Kondoing your cells, is fantastic. And the way that she explained mTOR is just, the door to muscle. Like, bravo, Leslie, really well done. I think that, overall her story is just one of essentially like grit and hope, which I hope it is my hope in hearing that also gives you some fortitude and maybe some cellular grit and some hope as well in your own life and whatever you're trying to achieve. It might not necessarily be a baby, but it could be just a really big goal that you're working towards. I loved a couple things that I really like. I loved the idea of a Femspan. I think that there's a lot of people that use the word span, like we've heard health span, lifespan, sex span, this span, that span. I love Femspan. It just sits really well with me, and this idea that we're not trying to be able to have babies when we're 70. Like, that's not the deal. The deal is that we're just trying to extend our youthfulness of our cells for as long as possible, which is kind of, a really big principle that I have in terms of beauty is not just like how much surgical interventions or injections or whatever you've had. All of those are good if you choose to have them, but it's more of a comment on your physiological status. So really enjoyed that. And I loved the other thing that just piques my nerdy self is the research that they're looking at right now. So again, she clarified clinical trials. We can make absolutely no conclusions right now, but looking at how Spermidine not only affects all of the 9 of the 12 hallmarks of aging that we talked about, but some of these other ideas like cancer and mitigating and potentially helping our immune system respond to and seek out and destroy cancer cells. I thought that was really phenomenal as well. overall, I think that this is probably a compound that we all should consider taking, especially since it seems like the Swiss Army knife. It kind of does a little bit of everything, and it's really hard to overdo it. That's another thing. Whenever we look at sort of pharmacological interventions, you really have to get the dosing and the titration right. Like she was talking about this with rapamycin as well. But if we stick to our plants, we stick to sort of, the natural world, let's say, it's really hard to go wrong. So with that, I want to know what you thought of this episode. And Canadians, my Canadian Betties, my maple syrup Betties, what are we thinking about having her? 5 years ago, what vision, right? To set up distribution and to be able to sell, something like in Canada to Canadians. I really love that because, like I said to her on the show, it's so common for Canadian women to say, I listened to the show, I really want to try this product, but it either doesn't ship to Canada at all, or the shipping is like $4 million, right? Which is like $7 US, but when you convert it, it ends up being like a house. So really, really happy to be able to offer that to Canadians. I love to gift my homeland with stuff whenever I can. Okay, so want to hear what you thought of the episode. Until next time, I bid you adieu, and we'll see you next time.